Hello, welcome to the channel. Today what we're going to talk about is business process tracking and maybe a little bit of integration environment, FAQ. So I've been chatting a lot recently with customers about this feature. All in all, it's gone over really well, so I'm really excited with the interest in where this is headed. And naturally, people have some questions. In addition, Michael Stevenson went ahead and created an overview video, and links below. Also put the link in the description. And he was highlighting the integration environment and business process tracking as well. And he brought up some really good questions. And so I figured if he's got those questions, others probably do as well. So that is the purpose of this video. So let's go ahead, let's dive into it. Now, this is important. So we're not done. This is business process tracking. This is a preview, and we are interested in your feedback. So I've got a very short survey where you can go ahead and provide some feedback about features that you're looking for. Also, if you want to follow up from me, happy to chat more about this with you. And you can go ahead and drop your email address in this form, and I will get back to you and we'll set up some time. I'll show this again later on in the video, and then also I'll put this in the description too. All right, so just so you don't have to go ahead and scroll through the whole video if there's specific topics you're interested in, these are the topics that I'm going to talk about. So we'll talk about cost, creating a database in ADX, ADX configuration settings, expressions, detecting errors. This is a big one. Business process tracking, supporting parallelism. Can I emit events from other sources? From what subscriptions can I add resources? And what about status and state of business process transactions? So we'll talk about these in the next few minutes, and we'll go from there. All right, so question number one, is there a cost for integration environment / business process tracking? So not directly, there isn't. So there's no additional charges or costs for using integration environments and business process tracking while we're in preview. Now, post-preview, hard to say, hard to predict exactly what that looks like. That's likely above my pay grade. So, I don't know which way we'll go at this point. But for preview, what I do know is there's no additional costs. So you will naturally incur costs for your logic apps that you're already incurring charges for. That is where the tracking does take place. When you publish or deploy a business process, we will inject a tracking profile in the logic apps that have been configured to be used. And as part of the jobs that just function normally to complete the executions of your actions, we basically attach to that job. And so we'll go ahead, look at the tracking profile, know when we need to go ahead and emit an event, and then we'll know what data we have to collect as well. So that naturally you're already paying for. And same thing with ADX, like you bring your own ADX instance. This is good for a couple reasons. Number one, it's your data, right? So you have full control over the data. You want to purge data. You have full control. You want to build external reports, dashboards, knock yourself out, no worries. Now, one thing you can do, especially if you're just in like prototype mode or POC mode, is when you provision your ADX, you can use the dev test instances. That's what I'm using in my demos, and that will automatically turn that instance off due to inactivity and save you some bucks. So definitely, for POCs, totally appropriate. Down the road, when we get to production and GA, you're not going to want your GA instance doing that, but for now, go ahead, save yourself a few bucks. Now, do I need to create a database in ADX? And the answer to this is yes. When you provision ADX, or even if you've got an existing instance, you should go ahead and create a database, and you can actually go ahead and assign appropriate roles and access as well. So when other people are trying to query your ADX instance, naturally they need to have the right access. So do go ahead, create that database, create any, set any permissions that you need to, And then what will happen is when we deploy, we will go ahead and create tables based upon the business process name. Now you do have the ability to overwrite that if you want. You can use a different name, and like say you can append like an environment like -dev, -test, etc. But also if you want, you can share a table as well across multiple business processes. Now that one I would say, like, you want to be a little bit careful about that. Technically, there's nothing wrong with that. There's no limitations. There's no collisions. We take care of that in our schema, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think it becomes more of like governance around data access. If a business process is capturing sensitive data and you're putting that in, say, table 1, and then you have another business process called, table 2 or business process 2, and it doesn't have sensitive data, maybe it's completely different types of data, probably doesn't make sense to commingle those. You probably want to separate those. So by default, we generally say create your own table, but that's more from like a data access perspective than anything else. All right, so Mike had brought up this. He shows in his video when he's provisioning an ADX instance, he gets prompted for these specific features. Now, we don't have any direct dependencies on these settings. These are user controlled, meaning if you want to enable them, you can, but we don't require them. We don't use them. So, my suggestion would be use the defaults. There's no need to turn on streaming ingestion or enable purge because we're not actively using either of those features. So you can read, what these features do, but we don't have a dependency on them, and I don't use them when I'm using my particular demo environment. Now the auto stop cluster, this comes back to that whole dev test scenario. In my model, this is fine. Like the weekends, I don't need my ADX running. I don't need to be incurring those charges. We're currently in preview. You shouldn't be using this for production. So if you want to use that, go for it. No issue there. Can I use expressions in business process tracking editor? Yes, you can, but do be mindful of where the data originates from and if it's unavailable or unreachable. Mike had an example where he tried to use workflow and it didn't work for him for some reason. I'm not quite sure what the reason was. Maybe there was a different issue that was going on, but I did go ahead and test this myself and this did work. I didn't have any issues with this. So workflow is a general expression. Basically what you can do is use this to extract sort of metadata about that execution. In this case, it's the actual run ID, the run instance ID. And so this, might be useful for troubleshooting purposes. The other thing to note about this run instance ID, we do capture this inside of ADX directly. So you may not need to go ahead and actually, include this. But I thought it was just a good sort of scenario where he initially updated a workflow to include this specific expression so that he could then go ahead and capture it like in a compose action. So he could then go ahead and pull from it from here. But the idea is like, hey, I can just go ahead and write an inline expression and just go ahead and use it. And that should work. If it's not working for you, do let me know. But when I tried it, it was good. Another interesting function that you need to be careful with, but it is interesting, is result. So result allows you to pass in a parameter that represents an action name, and you can then go and get the result or the status of that action. Now, what I did is I made a mistake where I went ahead and inside of a scope, I had the last step as a compose action, and inside of that compose action, I went ahead and had this result expression, but I had it for the scope that this compose action was nested within. That naturally ran through an error because it was kind of like, well, that's not available because it hasn't completed yet. So just be careful with this. The other thing I would say is do not, when we go ahead and use this experience and you can go ahead and use the token picker. We're using the same logic in the designer that will restrict what are the data properties that are available. We won't show you a data property that isn't available, perhaps because you haven't reached that point of the workflow. So don't try to trick things. You will run into issues if you try to craft expressions for which data may not be available. So just be mindful of that. Now, this is a big one. Sometimes, you go ahead, you build your business process, you do the mappings. Under the hood, we're creating tracking profiles. You go ahead, you deploy them, and then basically your workflows run, and your expectation is things are just working. Now, what happens is when you don't see any data, you don't see any data showing up in the transactions view, the question is now, where do you go look for that data? And so what you can do, there's two places, but here's place number one. Go to your overview page, then go to notifications tab, and here you will see where the tracking engine reports errors. Now, do be aware that there is a little bit of latency here. Don't expect it sooner than 5 minutes. I think 5-10 minutes is generally when you can expect those notifications to show up here. You can see the last time it occurred, and you can also see how many times it's occurred. So if you've got this recurring sort of loop that's going on, naturally you can see how many times that has occurred. So quite valuable. I'm not sure, this is relatively new, this notifications tab, so I'm not sure if people are used to looking here, but that's why I wanted to bring it up. Now, the next place is application insights. And so this is also important. So I think this is a query. I can go ahead and I'll include this in the description of the video, but you should also use this, especially when you think about having multiple logic apps. That means you've got multiple tracking profiles. And if those logic apps share an application insights instance, then you're good, right? Then you've got a common place for all your logic apps to log. So here it is. It is in the traces table. And then basically here's the query where message contains, and then you've got this operation name equals workflow definition provider, right? So this will be a good place to query to see if you've got any sort of issues. All right, next question. Does business process tracking support parallelism and conditions? So let's start with parallelism first. So yes, what you can do here is you got ticket created, work order created, etc. I want to branch out. I can go ahead and add a parallel stage. You always have to click the stage above, and then what you'll see is this fork that takes place. And then basically you can model from there. Now, if you do need to then continue on and adding more steps below, you certainly have the ability to go ahead and do that. Now, if you think about conditions, we don't have an explicit conditions option here, but you can use the parallel stage. Now, what that means, let's say this is condition A, this is condition B. It doesn't mean that both have to take place for it to continue, right? So you could have this as continue A, or condition A, condition B, and basically this would end up just being blank if condition B actually was the outcome. So that is another way you can model it. It doesn't have to be explicitly parallel for this to sort of continue. Basically, what we're doing is we are creating a conceptual business process. We have the underlying track data. We then, basically map the data in the data store to your visual. So it's not like this is a constraint. This is enforcing a constraint. This is more of just lighting up what has taken place. So this is probably the number one question. And the question is, can I omit events from other services? And I can see how sometimes this gets a little bit confusing, because when you create an application, we do ask you to add your resources in. And as part of the resources that you can add, we include APIs and service bus entities. Now, that sort of goes back to the heritage of this feature where we included application monitoring as part of an earlier demo. And so we did leave that because I think there's still value in having that application from a management perspective. But I would agree that it does add more value when you've got monitoring sort of hooked into it as well. Now the question then becomes, okay, well, where can I emit events from? And for today, it is just Logic App standard workflows where you can go ahead and do that. So the question is, what are the other services that you would want to do this from? And this is where I need your feedback. This is where, your signals will help us prioritize these investments. But don't just say, I need logic, or I need functions, I need APIs. Like, tell me how you would use it. And particularly interested in scenarios or architectures. Like, maybe you have a valid scenario where you just have APIs and you have functions, and there is no workflows. But like, it is one of those things where if a Logic App is kind of orchestrating the process, could you get by with just like Logic App support? Because you go ahead, you track the event, you maybe call a function, the function returns a value, you then track again inside of your workflow. You basically get the result of the function. But if you have scenarios where maybe you are using a function and you have some sort of trigger on the function, and that's really the first step in your business process, and then you hand it off to a queue, and then maybe the Logic App consumes from the queue, then naturally only having tracking in Logic Apps might be a bit of an issue because you've got a few steps that have already taken place. But the more details you can provide, the better, because we're genuinely interested in those scenarios where Logic Apps may not be in the picture. All right, so another question, from what subscriptions can I add Azure resources? So good question, and the answer for now is that you can add resources from the same subscription. So you go ahead, you create your integration environment. It used to be called Space. Old habits die hard. So you go ahead and create your integration environment. That's in a specific subscription, right? Then what this is saying is that you can go add resources from that subscription. Now, we did this deliberately, but it doesn't have to be this way. Why we did this was that typically customers will have subscriptions for like dev, test, production, etc. And especially when it comes to production, customers typically don't like crosstalk. They don't like resources from one subscription being able to talk into another subscription. Becomes a bit of a governance problem. Now, we've also heard the flip side of this, where for non-prod subscriptions, some customers don't mind this because they might share some of the premium resources, like a premium API management instance, a premium service bus instance. And as a result, it makes sense to share. So this is another area. Do give us feedback. But for now, it is all based on resources in the same subscription. All right, so I think this is the last FAQ. And happy to create another one of these videos in the future as well. What we've got here is, what about business process state or status? And this is another area where I need your feedback. Now, when I look at this visual, we see that the technician was on site, and then we just see like, hey, we don't have any sort of signals about these last two stages. So it begs the question, did something fail? And that's why we don't have these last two events showing up? Or is the technician still working on the problem, right? And I think that's a question we've had from a few customers is how do we model this? How do we support this? And so it'd be great to understand, what your needs are here. Now, we're not positioning this as the Uber technical support tool, but think about it more from a business process perspective. How would this work? So once again, feedback link will be in the description. So I got someone cleaning their driveway because it's snowing here big time in Calgary. So maybe it's a good time to close this out. But go ahead, fill out the feedback, please. Happy to connect with you, chat more about business process tracking and your needs. And also, if you're not following me on Twitter or X, find me at Weirzy. Like, subscribe, comments, welcome as well. Thanks, and take care.